Today's reading is from Matthew 11, verses 25 to 28. At that time, Jesus said, "I praise you, Father, Lord of heaven and earth, because you have hidden these things from the wise and intelligent and revealed them to infants. Yes, Father, because this was your good pleasure. All things have been entrusted to me by my Father. No one knows the Son except the Father, and no one knows the Father except the Son, and anyone to whom the Son desires to reveal him. Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." This is the word of the Lord.
As we begin this morning, I'd like to ask you a question. So you can go ahead and talk about this. You can turn to your neighbor, turn to who you came in with, or just feel free to think about it. The question is this: if you could do anything, if you were free to do anything you wanted and you never had to worry about getting in trouble, what would you do? Go ahead, talk about it. If you could do anything without consequences, in fact, people might even help you along, what would you do with that freedom? Go ahead, talk about that for a minute. My wife's asking for examples. No, that would be counterproductive. So not looking for a right or wrong answer here. Just be honest, though. Just tell the truth. Be honest. What would you do with that kind of freedom? So do you need some more time? How many of you don't know what you would do with it? Like, that much freedom is paralyzing. Yeah, that can be true. How many of you heard somebody say something to you, you're just like, I can't believe that's what you would do? Did you hear did somebody say that? Yeah, okay. I'd love to hear some of those after the gathering, but this morning, as we continue in our series of good faith questions, we're wrapping it up, and the question that we're ending this series with is, why does it matter how I live my life if I'm not hurting anyone? Like, what difference does it make how I live if I'm not hurting anybody? And I've been looking forward to this question for a while because I think it's so important. I think that the people who ask this question have a lot of courage. And it's not coming out of nowhere. There's usually a context for this, and we'll get into that. I also want to say it's really important with a question like this, with all of our questions, of course, but a question like this, it's really important that we speak sensitively and respectfully. Okay? And so today, I'm not trying to win an argument. I'm not trying to poke holes in anybody's thoughts or feelings or anything like that. I'm also not trying to sound smart. Okay? I'm not trying to make fun of anybody. What I do want to do, though, is offer another perspective and hopefully ask some helpful questions. Now, as we go along, if you feel that I've been unfair or unkind, or if I haven't dealt with something that you think is important to deal with in a question like this, there is a phone number on the back of the pew in front of you, and you're welcome to text your question into that phone number, and we can deal with it at the end of the gathering here. As we begin this morning, though, we'll deal with some assumptions. This has been a helpful practice for us, because a person who might ask the question, why does it matter how I live my life if I'm not hurting anyone? That person might be making some assumptions that are helpful to just put on the table. For example, if you feel I'm free to live however I want as long as I'm not hurting anyone, you might be assuming that freedom is the ability to do whatever I want. Okay? You might assume what I do with my body and my money and my time is nobody's business but my own. You might assume that. You might be assuming that we must be tolerant of all views except for the views that limit other people's freedom. You might assume nobody but me is qualified to say what's best for me. Okay? You might assume that. You might assume that I'll be a better, happier person by refusing to imitate anyone else's example. Or I'll be a better, happier person if nobody is allowed to influence my choices. You might assume that. You might assume the world will get better as people are more and more free to express their authentic selves. Or giving someone advice or correction is a form of control. You might assume that. Another one is, I am inherently good, and I will always use my freedom for good. You might also assume I already have everything that I need in order to live my best life. I'm enough. I have everything I need to live my best life. So these are some of the conclusions that some people that are made in a conversation sometimes about how we live and about ethics. And it's interesting that as a culture, we've reached this conclusion: I'm free to live however I want as long as I'm not hurting anyone. I'm free to live however I want as long as I'm not hurting anyone. That's our starting point. Like, that's just the air that we breathe. And whether you're a churched person or an unchurched person, or if you're de-churched and you left the church a long time ago, this is just our starting point. Okay? And there's a good reason for that. There's a good reason for how we came to that, because we live in what's called an age of authenticity. Now, I didn't make that up. It's a phrase that was coined by a Canadian philosopher named Charles Taylor, and he's written a lot about secularism and some of the shifts in Western culture over the last few centuries and generations. And when he talks about secularism, he's very clear to say secularism isn't a bad thing. It's not this monster that we should be afraid of. It's not bad, and it's also not new, but it has evolved. And so, for a lot of centuries, for example, for a lot of centuries, for most of Western history, the term secular was just used to describe any spaces or any institutions that weren't overtly religious. So education, politics and stuff, that stuff was secular. That was sort of the first wave of secularism. There was a second wave of secularism that came in since the Enlightenment. And this was sort of a deplatforming of religion and religious claims and religious teachings. The aim wasn't to remove religion from the culture altogether. The aim was just to elevate other voices and make space for other kinds of voices. That was the second wave of secularism. But there's a third wave of secularism that we're in now, it's quite recent, that says that religious belief itself is weird. It's a problem, it's unnecessary. And this wave of secularism says we're actually, as a culture, we're better off without it. And so if you're someone with religious beliefs, you're actually on the defensive. It's your responsibility to explain why in the world you would choose this life over this life that the rest of us are living. And so because religion in this third wave has lost its voice, it's given rise to this age of authenticity, where we don't need religion. We don't depend on religion to teach us about good and evil anymore, or how to live. And I'm not even saying that's all bad. I'm just saying that's the reality. We live in an age of authenticity. In fact, here's how Charles Taylor describes the situation in an essay called The Ethics of Authenticity. He says, "There's a certain way of being human, that is, my way. I am called upon to live my life in this way and not in imitation of anybody else's way. Not only should I not fit my life to the demands of external conformity, I can't even find the model to live by outside myself." Do you hear that? Not only should I not fit my life to the demands of external conformity, not only should I not follow someone else's rules or example, I can't even find the model or the example to live by outside myself. I can find it only within. Being true to myself means being true to my own originality, and that is something only I can articulate and discover. In articulating it, I am also defining myself. I am realizing a potentiality that is properly my own. And Charles Taylor says, this is the background understanding to the modern ideal of authenticity and to the goals of self-fulfillment and self-realization in which it's usually couched. So I know that's a long quote, but what Charles Taylor is essentially saying is that there's no longer anything that we can point to outside of ourselves and say, that's good. That's what I want to be. That's what I should be. I have to be original. Only I can define myself, and only then can I realize my potential. And so, whereas in other cultures or in other generations, we might say, it's good if you want to make the world a better place. That's good. Sure, that's a good life if you can make the world a better place. What's really good is if you're original, and if you're different and unique, and you aren't imitating anybody else's example. That's the age of authenticity. Okay? So in the age of authenticity, the most authentic version of me is the one that I create. That's the best life. Okay? And you owe it to yourself. In an age of authenticity, you owe it to yourself, you owe it to the world to find and to be your most authentic self. And I was thinking, man, that reminds me of the movie Frozen. Now, I'm a girl dad twice over, and my girls were little right at the time when Frozen came out. And we sang the song Let It Go all the time. All the time. I think we have some videos of that, but I won't show those today. But if you remember the story of Frozen, Elsa she's this little girl, and she has these ice powers, okay? You remember, have you seen Frozen? How many of you seen Frozen? Okay, most of us. Okay, so Elsa lives in fear of these ice powers that she's born with, and so she has to hide who she is. She's not even allowed to touch anyone. She wears gloves, right? So Elsa's not free. She's trapped. She's got all this pressure to conceal herself, to not feel anything, to keep people at a distance, all this expectation to perform until we come to the famous song, Let It Go, which is her transformation moment. Now, I've got to be honest, I love Frozen, and I love this song. Listen to some of the lyrics from Let It Go. The snow glows white on the mountain tonight, not a footprint to be seen. Some of you are singing along. A kingdom of isolation, and it looks like I'm the queen. The wind is howling like this swirling storm inside. I couldn't keep it in. Heaven knows I tried. Don't let them in. Don't let them see. Be the good girl you always have to be. Conceal, don't feel, don't let them know. Well, now they know. Let it go, can't hold back anymore. Let it go, turn away and slam the door. I don't care what they're going to say, let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway. So she goes on, and at the end of the song it ends with this. Let it go, and I will rise like the break of dawn. Let it go, that perfect girl is gone. Here I stand in the light of day, let the storm rage on. The cold never bothered me anyway. Man, how could you not love that song, that moment of Elsa's transformation? She's no longer that perfect Elsa. She's now embraced her power. She's embraced her true self. She's now the real, true, authentic Elsa. Nobody's going to tell her what to do anymore. She's not scared of herself anymore. She's free. And that's got to be like the theme song for the age of authenticity, don't you think? Like, I couldn't think of a better song that expresses what we're talking about with this age of authenticity. And if we were out for coffee, if we were talking about freedom, and if we were having having a conversation about freedom, one of the things I'd want to do is talk about this movie Frozen, and we'd talk about how much we both love it. But we'd also talk about authenticity. And I'd want to share some questions and concerns. And so this morning I'm going to share just a small handful, just 3 questions about authenticity. For example, the first one is a question of authority. As we talk about the age of authenticity, we need to ask a question about authority. Because let's say you believe, I'm free to live how I want as long as I'm not hurting anyone. Okay, great. But I kind of wonder, like, who's to say that this is the best way to live? Like, where did that come from? Who decided that? Why not hurt anyone? Not saying we should, but why do we agree that we shouldn't hurt anyone? Who says that that's the good life? And I kind of illustrate it this way. I'm going to put up 3 statements, okay, from 3 different cultures, and we'll talk about that for a minute. For example, here's culture 1. Culture 1 is an authenticity culture and says its maxim is you're free to do what you want as long as it doesn't hurt anyone. Okay, that's the authenticity culture. Culture 2 is an honor culture. And in an honor culture, you say you're free to do whatever doesn't hurt or shame the family. Okay, you're free to do whatever doesn't shame or embarrass the family. Culture 3, though, is what you might call a warrior culture. And in a warrior culture, you might say you are destined for greatness. You are destined for glory, and so you must crush whoever stands in your way. Now, are there any honor cultures in the world right now? Sure there are. Some of you may have grown up in an honor culture where you were taught you can do whatever you want, you can make whatever choices you want, but do not bring honor or dishonor or embarrassment on the family. Yeah, sure there are honor cultures in the world. Can you think of any places or times in history that you might describe as a warrior culture? Are there some places and times in the world where it was a warrior culture instead? Yeah, absolutely. But which of these 3 best seems to embody Canada in 2026? The authenticity culture. That's kind of interesting. And so this idea, don't hurt anyone else, it's not a bad idea, but it's kind of become enshrined as this authoritative statement in our culture. But when you step back and you look at other cultures and their beliefs, it's kind of arbitrary. Because depending on when or where you live, your culture might have an entirely different set of values. Again, I'm not saying that we should hurt each other. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that if we accept the culture's view of freedom, the culture's definition of freedom, that's fine. But what we've done there, we need to accept that what we've done is we've actually just made the culture our Bible. Okay? Now, everyone has a Bible. Everyone looks at something, some source of teaching or ethics, and says that is authoritative. Everybody does that. Whether you're religious or not, everybody's doing that. Now, on the other hand, Christians believe that in the Bible we have an objective set of teachings and values, and we believe that those transcend culture. They don't change. They don't shift. And we may be wrong about that. Okay? We may be wrong about what the Bible is. But if it's true, if what the Bible says is true, then the Scriptures are actually an authority that we can trust. And so if your starting point is I'm free to live however I want as long as I'm not hurting anyone, I would just want to caution you, this doesn't have the foundation on which to build a life. This isn't an authority on which to shape our lives. It happens to agree with the culture right now. But what are you going to do when it shifts? Like, what will happen when the culture changes its mind? And so there's an authority problem here that we should talk about. There's an authority problem. We should also talk about a question of purpose. A question of purpose. Here, what I'm saying is, in the question of purpose, what I'm saying is, okay, so you believe I'm free to do whatever I want as long as I'm not hurting anyone. But I would ask, is that what's best for us? Is that what we're made for? Is that kind of freedom, is that what we're made for? Is that in line with our purpose and our design? Because, and I would say it this way, freedom has two sides, okay? If you grew up in a strict kind of traditional home, you probably think about freedom as in terms of getting free from those rules, from getting free from those limits and constraints. And that's one kind of freedom. That's what's called negative freedom. It's being free from something. But there's another kind of freedom. There's another side to freedom. It's positive freedom. And positive freedom is freedom to do what you're made to do, or freedom to be what you're meant to be. It's the freedom for something else. So let me illustrate. I can set a fish free from his bowl. I can do that. That's not hard to do. That's one kind of freedom. That's negative freedom. And if I do that, he'll die. Okay? Why will he die? Because, as you know, fish are designed to live underwater. He may be free from his bowl, but he's not free to live, and he's not free to thrive. Right? I could set a turtle free from his shell. That's not going to work out really well for the turtle either, because he's not free to live and enjoy life. Even if he's free from his shell, he's not free to thrive, because he's made to live in a shell. He can't have freedom unless he accepts the limits of living in a shell. And in the same way, when we talk about freedom in our culture, when we talk about freedom, we focus a lot on negative freedom and not enough on positive freedom. Okay? Like, if you're an adult in this culture, and as long as you're not breaking any laws, no one can stop you from doing what you want with your money and your time and food and your body and entertainment and social media. Nobody can stop you from doing what you want with any of those any of those areas. Nobody can stop you from sleeping around if you choose to. No one can stop you from smoking or drinking or whatever you want to, or as much as you want to. And that's negative freedom. That is freedom, but that's negative freedom. And if you live that way, nobody will criticize you. But it's no guarantee that you'll flourish. In fact, the experience of a lot of people is that the fewer limits that we have in place, the more that we feel stuck, like fish out of water. We're trapped. Now, we've been told that the best way to live is to reject everything that limits our freedom. And at the same time, we are less satisfied than any generation in history. We're more anxious. We're more depressed. Why is that? Well, let me say this. The culture has no answer to that question. It has no answer to this. That's the broken promise of the age of authenticity. The age of authenticity promises that the best way to live is to throw off all constraints, to throw off all limits. It says, don't look to anybody else. It's all in you. You have everything you need. So what happens when that's not working? Christianity offers some hope, some good news. Here's how Pastor Tim Keller says it. He says, human beings thrive in certain environments and break down in others. If you actually lived any way you wanted, never aligning your choices with these physical and social realities, you would quickly die and die alone. You are then not free to do whatever you choose. This is an impossible idea and not the way real freedom actually works. You get the best freedoms only if you're willing to submit your choices to various realities. If you honor your own design. You hear that? You get the best freedoms only if you honor your own design. Now, there are lots of worldviews that tell us about about our purpose. Christianity claims that we have a creator who formed us and designed us with love, like an artist. And Christianity says that the greatest command, like the one rule, is to love God and to love your neighbor. That's our design. That's our purpose. That's what we're designed for. We're not designed to live apart from him. We're not designed to have absolute freedom and independence. That much freedom is paralyzing. It's a burden that we're not made to handle. And so in other words, what I would want to suggest here as we talk about purpose is I'd want to suggest that the good life, true freedom, isn't a life without limits, but it's a life that accepts the limits that will help us to flourish according to our design. Okay, let me say that again. True freedom isn't a life without limits. It's a life that accepts the limits that'll help us to flourish according to our design. And again, I would say it's possible that Christians are totally wrong about this. It could be possible that we are totally wrong and this is all a waste of time. But even if we are, the age of authenticity doesn't tell us what our purpose is, except that we create our own purpose. And that is a dreadful burden. I wouldn't wish that on anybody. That's the problem with the age of authenticity. It's a problem of purpose. Now, there's one more question. It's a little bit different, though. This one's a little more personal. It's a question of pain. Now, here, I would simply want to ask a person, what have you lived through? Like, what happened? What have you seen? What have you experienced? Because if your starting point is, it makes no difference how I live as long as I'm not hurting anyone, I suspect it's maybe because you've been around some religious people and you've seen or maybe experienced some hurt or maybe some harm. And that's certainly not true of everyone, but it is true of a lot of people. Okay, it's definitely true that there are people who have experienced genuine religious trauma. Okay? Now, religious trauma isn't something that affects everybody. Not every bad thing that happens in a church or in church world or in any religious community, not every one of those is an example of religious trauma, but it does happen. It does happen, and I get it. As an adult, I'll tell you this, all of my most painful betrayals, all of my most painful personal attacks were done by Christians, and particularly Christian leaders. And it wasn't always trauma, but I do have some, and many people do. So I have a lot of empathy for people who've been hurt or who've been burned by religious people, especially in the church. And many of you have seen this. You've lived through it. An example comes to mind. Today happens to be Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada. I don't know if you know this or not. It's Indigenous Peoples Day in Canada. It's a day to recognize the contribution of the Indigenous community to Canada. And across the world, actually. And so part of Indigenous Peoples Day means accepting and recognizing and remembering that there was a time in Canada's history, not that long ago, just about 100 years ago, not even, when the Canadian government and some Christian denominations cooperated to put Native kids in residential schools, to take them from their homes and put them in residential schools, and to destroy everything, to chip away at everything that was native about these children. Their traditions, their beliefs, their language, their dress, even their hairstyles, even their sports. To tear all of this down, to kill everything that was native in the child, and to make them more Canadian. And that was bad enough, okay? That would be bad enough. But as many of you know, these residential schools were places where a lot of unspeakable abuses took place as well. That was religious trauma. Okay? That was religious trauma, and it's not okay. And so for some people, when they say, I'm free to live however I choose as long as I'm not hurting anyone, they're not saying, religion is bad. What they're really saying is, I've seen what some Christians do. I've seen how some Christians treat people, and I just don't want to be part of that. Like if that's Christianity, then I can have a good life and do less harm without it. And I don't blame you for feeling that way. I don't blame you for feeling that way. In fact, I'd want to hear more of your story. I'd want to learn from you. And then I'd also say, I'm sorry that Christians have hurt you. I'm sorry that Christians have harmed you. That wasn't okay. All right? Maybe they were acting out of fear. Maybe they were acting out of pride or greed or fear of a loss of power or something like that, but they weren't acting out of obedience to Jesus. That was wrong. That wasn't Christianity. That wasn't Christianity, and it wasn't Jesus. And because I love you, I would also say this age of authenticity has no good news for you. It has nothing better than that to offer. It says it's your job to define yourself. It says it's all on you. No right, no wrong, no rules for me. I'm free, let it go. You have to create your own original, authentic self without imitating anyone else. And if in some cases that may be helpful. But the truth is, there actually are some examples worth imitating, aren't there? There are some examples worth imitating. Can I tell you something? Nobody ever accused Jesus of being a hypocrite. Jesus had lots of hard things to say. He did lots of things that offended people, but nobody accused Jesus of being a hypocrite and like doing one thing in public and doing another thing in private. Nobody ever called Jesus a legalist or a Pharisee, okay? Trying to impose a system of control and compliance on people's freedoms. Nobody ever called Jesus a fundamentalist, only caring about conformity. And so if you're somebody who's been hurt or has been burned by religion, I would say part of your healing process involves an important process. Some people call this deconstruction. But where in a humble, loving, faithful church community, you learn to separate genuine Christianity from the man-made systems. Okay? That's deconstruction. That's a really important process for people who've been hurt. You need to be part of a community where we're learning to differentiate between the real Jesus, as he's presented to us in Scripture, and our distortions, our man-made distortions of who Jesus is. You need to be in a community where we are learning to follow that Jesus. There is a real Jesus. There are a lot of distortions, but there is a real Jesus, and he is worth following. And the real Jesus says, "Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest." Come to me, all of you who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. Can I say something that may be a little controversial? If we are not experiencing Jesus as rest, we're doing it wrong. Okay? If we're not experiencing Jesus as rest, we're doing it wrong. Jesus looks out at a world that is broken and weary and worn out. And some of those people, they're worn out because they have tried and failed to keep all the religious rules. And some of those people are tired and burnt out because they've tried and failed to define themselves according to the age of authenticity. And Jesus looks out at both groups and he says, "Take my yoke upon you and learn from me, because I am lowly and humble in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." You'll find rest for your souls. Why would we experience Jesus as rest? He says, because my yoke is easy and my burden is light. My yoke is easy and my burden is light. This morning we've been saying there's no such thing as a life that's free from limits and burdens and responsibilities. Everybody has to choose to live with certain limits. Everybody lives with a yoke. Okay? Everyone lives with certain burdens. The question is never, how can we live free of any limits? The question is, what are the limits that I can accept that will help me to be the most free? Jesus is really honest. Whatever your experience is of religious communities or churches or Christians, Jesus is really honest. He doesn't say, I don't have a burden. He doesn't say, I don't have a yoke. He says, I do. But my yoke is easy. My burden is light. So before I close in prayer, let me share these take-it-home questions for you to keep the conversation going, keep thinking about over the course of this week. The first one is this: if you could change something about the Christian faith, what would it be? Second, does Christianity make people good? Does it? Number 3, what are some limits that you have accepted on your freedom? What are some of the limits that you have accepted on your own freedom? And then third, is it your experience that Jesus' yoke is easy, that his burden is light? I'd love to just close us in prayer now. Please just take a posture, friends, of just relax, just settle into your seat, just open yourself, just take a posture of acceptance and curiosity and openness. You are safe in this place, and I want to pray for you. I want to pray for all of us, Lord Jesus, that you would help us to tear away our distortions of who you are, the man-made distortions, the distortions created by religious people who wanted to control us, religious people who were afraid of individuals and individuality, people who were afraid of creativity and artists. And as a result, some people got marginalized who really shouldn't have been. Some people have been excluded who really should have been at the table, and that's not okay. And so, God, I pray that you would grant repentance to the church in this culture, beginning with us and beginning with me. I pray that we would be a people who are never found saying no to someone to whom you've already said yes. I pray that we would choose holiness for its own sake, because it's good, because there's joy and freedom in holiness, in following you and having you, Jesus, as our rabbi. I pray that today would be a day where people cast off the distortions and cast off the counterfeits and say, today, Jesus, I choose to follow you. I choose to give my life to you, to put my life and my future, all my ambitions and dreams into your hands. I belong to you. Forgive my sin, accept me, heal me, make me new. God, I pray that many of our friends and brothers and sisters here and elsewhere would be making that decision today. Bring healing and bring hope, and free us from the burdens that we put on ourselves. In this age of authenticity, I pray that we could be radical and subversive and different by saying there is greater freedom by accepting the yoke and the burden of Jesus Christ. In his name I pray. Amen. Amen. Just before we continue in song, we're going to invite parents. You can go ahead and get your kids from the kids space classroom, get them signed out there. But the rest of us, we're going to stay and we're going to continue the conversation with this question. I invite you to turn to the people you came in with. Here's the question: what bothers you more? Is it being told what to do, or seeing people waste their freedom? Okay? Lots of us are bothered by both of those things. What bothers you more? Is it when somebody tells you what to do, or seeing people waste their freedom? Go ahead and discuss that for a bit, and then we'll continue in worship in just a moment.